Very, very dreadfully nervous I have been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? For the disease has sharpened my senses, not dulled them, not destroyed. I have heard many things in heaven and in the earth, and I have heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you my story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never once given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had an eye that resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film that covered it. And whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissemination I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man in that week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently, gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out. And then, I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well within the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. And I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon that vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went into his room boldly, calling him by name, and I spoke courageously, inquiring, "How have you passed the night?" So you see, he would have had to have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him whilst he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on his bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with thick darkness. You see, he always kept the shutters closed through fear of robbers. So I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it in on steadily, steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up on his bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not the groan of pain or of grief. No, it was the stiff, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. And I knew that sound well. Many a night, just at midnight when all the world slept, it welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since that first slight noise when he had turned in his bed, and his fears had ever since been growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to myself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket who has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself, but he could not. He found in them all vain. Everything he had thought was all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked him with his black shadow before him and enveloped its victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he could neither see nor hear, but to feel the presence of my head within the room. And when I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how sleepily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open. Wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man, for I had directed the rays, as if by instinct, precisely on that damned spot. And now, have I told you what a mistake you've made in thinking me mad? It is nothing but an over-acuteness of the senses. Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound. Such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart, and it increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless, and I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon that eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say, louder and louder. Do you mark me well? I have told you I am nervous, and so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and I stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, Once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled a heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me, for it would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I removed the bed again. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead, and his eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will not think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I then took up 3 planks from the floorings of his chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could detect a single trace. There was nothing to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I'd been too clever for that. A tub had caught it all. When I made an end of these labors, this was 4 o'clock, but still dark as midnight. And as the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking on the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor. On suspicion of foul play, had been logged in at the police station. And they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country, and I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed, and in the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them, sit here and rest from your fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which rested the corpse of that victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much like the sound that a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor, to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Mighty God, no! They heard, they suspected, they knew! This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more terrible than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. And now, again, hark! Louder, louder!